cold halls of a stone castle where titles mattered more than names, and silence was safer than truth, two women found each other. One, a noble lady, weighed down by expectation. The other, a servant girl, invisible in every room but one. They never kissed in daylight, never wrote what they felt, but in the braids they wove and the ribbons they tied, they left behind a garden no fire could burn. Tonight, we walk with them, through shadow, through exile, and through the quiet blooming of something forbidden and unforgettable. This is not a story of war or glory, but of two souls who dared to love in a world that forbade it. This is the braid.
The frost still clung to the edges of the window when she woke. A sliver of dawn, blue and faint like the breath of a dying candle, spilled through the iron lattice of the servants' quarters. It caught the edge of a woolen blanket, rough against her cheek, and the distant toll of a bell stirred her senses into obedience before thought could intervene. The fire in the corner had long since become ash. The stone beneath her bare feet was colder than memory. Her name was Linnet, or had been once. No one used names here. She rose in silence, as all handmaids did, and pulled on her flaxen shift, the same one as yesterday and the day before, mended a dozen times with a skill she'd never learned to boast about. There was no time for modesty or warmth. Already the others were waking, their eyes heavy, their faces unreadable. A basin of water stood in the center of the room. She dipped her hands in, gasping softly, then wiped her face with the coarse edge of her linen sleeve. Today, like every day, she would serve the Lady Elinor. Lady Elinor, daughter of Duke Matthijs of Harthwick, heir to vineyards and quarrels and lands none of them would ever see. Elinor, with her silks from Aquitaine and her copper mirror from Byzantium, who knew nothing of cold stones and coarse blankets. Linnet did not resent her. No, there was something worse than resentment. There was loyalty. That terrible, quiet yearning to be useful, to be chosen, to be seen. She crossed the southern courtyard quickly, head down, arms wrapped tight to preserve heat. Through the fogged arches she glimpsed the falconer untying the hoods of his birds. Someone was scrubbing yesterday's blood from the stones outside the kitchens. A nobleman coughed in the distance, a dry, royal sound. The castle, like a slumbering beast, stretched its spine. By the time Linnet reached the lady's chamber, her hands were trembling. The door creaked open under her gloved knuckles. The room was dark, save for two candles still burning low beside the velvet-curtained bed. The hearth had gone out. The lady slept with one hand folded under her chin, golden hair spilling like spilled honey across the pillow. Her breathing was soft, yet commanding. Linnet bowed her head low. Then she got to work. She gathered the velvet robe from the floor, smoothed out the embroidered crest of the boar and rose, House Harthwick's symbol, and hung it by the fire to warm. She unlatched the shutters just a little to let in the gray morning. She set out the lavender tea from the eastern shelf, the silver kettle etched with runes. Every movement was a prayer, every step a silent vow. She knew what came next, the ritual of morning obedience. The lady must awaken to a room already in reverence. The bed covers must not wrinkle. The tea must steam precisely as her handmaid offered the goblet. And the first thing Eleanor must see was not the cold stone or the rising sun, but Linnet kneeling, with eyes lowered and hands clasping a white cloth embroidered with the lady's initials. Linnet lit a fresh candle from the old one. The new flame danced and bent in the draught. She could hear the clock to her bell, second toll, nearly late. She folded the cloth carefully. The embroidery was her own, tiny green vines curling around a golden letter A her fingers had bled once stitching it in the moonlight weeks ago. She did not know why she cared so much. She heard the lady stir. Linnet dropped to her knees. "My lady," she whispered, voice barely above a breath. The lady groaned softly, the way the nobility always did when waking from too soft dreams. A hand reached out blindly toward the edge of the bed. "I brought your cloth, my lady," Linnet said. Eleanor opened one eye and blinked. She stared at Linnet for a long moment, the way one stares at a familiar painting with affection, but no memory. She sat up, clutching the embroidered cloth like a symbol, not a gift. "Is it warm?" the lady asked. Linnet nodded. "Warmed by the hearth, my lady." There was a pause, as if this answer was being judged. "Good," the lady murmured. "I don't want the cold to find me today." Linnet remained kneeling until told to rise. And she was told with a wave of the hand, nothing more. She stood, quietly poured the lavender tea into the goblet and handed it with a practiced bow. The lady sipped once, then handed it back without a word. Linnet caught the last of the steam against her fingertips. It would be a good day, because the lady had smiled. A small one at the corner of her lips, but it was there. Linnet saw it. And as she turned away to draw back the velvet curtain fully, bathing the chamber in the hesitant gold of early sun, she let herself feel something that was. The sun had barely climbed above the eastern towers when Linnet stepped into the bathing chamber. Unlike the stone chill of the sleeping quarters, this room was humid, perfumed, and quietly alive. A cauldron of water simmered gently in the hearth, filling the space with a veil of rising steam. The scent of dried lavender, rosemary, and a hint of aged sandalwood clung to the thick air like memory. Today was the lady's cleansing day, one of the sacred rituals performed before the feast of Saint Esmir, patroness of beauty and devotion. Linnet's bare feet tapped softly across the rush-strewn floor. The brass tub had already been filled by the morning servants, a rare privilege permitted only once every 10 days. The water was dyed pale green with crushed mint leaves and basil. A linen towel was draped across a carved wooden screen. Beside the tub sat a low tray lined with earthen pots. One held ash soap made from lye and goat fat, another a paste of rose petals and honey. A third, darker pot held charcoal ground so fine it looked like smoke caught in clay. She breathed it in, this mixture of warmth, herbs, and silent purpose, then turned to greet her lady. Eleanor entered the chamber in silence, wrapped in a silk robe the color of cream. Her hair was loosely braided, and her cheeks carried the faint flush of having just woken. Two guards waited outside the door, heads bowed, while a veiled harpist played somewhere distantly in the great hall beyond. "Begin," the lady said simply. Linnet nodded. She undressed the lady with delicate hands, folding each layer of silk onto a stool. Nobles were never touched roughly. Each gesture had to be both invisible and reverent, as if the body they revealed was made of sacred glass. When Eleanor stepped into the tub, the surface rippled only slightly, sending rings outward like halos breaking apart. Linnet dipped the ash soap into the water and lathered it in her palms. Kneeling beside the tub, she began with the lady's shoulders, slow circles, upward strokes, careful not to leave cold patches. Then the arms, slender and freckled, the hands that never held a broom or blade, yet still bore calluses from embroidery needles. Linnet had memorized these hands. "My father says I'll be betrothed by winter," Eleanor said suddenly. Linnet paused, her fingers still resting at the lady's wrist. "To whom, my lady?" "I forget his name," Eleanor replied. "Some knight from the eastern border. He owns vineyards, he limps. They say he writes poetry." Linnet wanted to say something, anything, but she only nodded and poured a warm pitcher of mint water down the lady's back. After the cleansing came the beautification. It was Linnet's favorite part. She retrieved the small bowl of rose honey paste and dabbed it onto the lady's cheeks, spreading it in slow motions until her skin glowed beneath the candlelight. Then came the charcoal, applied with a reed-thin stick to the rim of each eye. A touch of wine-colored crushed berries stained the lips, followed by oil pressed from calendula and foxglove to polish the skin. Eleanor never thanked her. She didn't have to, but today she spoke again. "When I was young," she said, "I thought servants were born without dreams." Linnet kept her gaze down. "Now I see it's worse. You have them but cannot chase them." The words pierced like cold water. "I never considered dreams, my lady." Eleanor laughed, a sound like wind through silk. "Then you are wiser than me." After the ritual, Linnet dried her lady with linen towels, wrapped her hair in soft wool, and guided her to the dressing room. The air had grown cooler now. Outside the arrow-slit window, snow threatened the edge of the sky. Linnet remained behind. She knelt by the tub and stared at the surface, still faintly rippling with the shape of the lady's form. She reached out and touched the water, let her hand sink in, warm and silken. She had dreams once, not of riches or titles, but of warmth that belonged to her, a hand that touched her with intention, a morning that was not choreographed in silence. She sighed, then pulled the stopper from the bath. As the water drained, so too did the memory of that fleeting conversation, and with it, the permission to feel it mattered. Mid-morning bells echoed faintly through the stone corridors as Lynette carried the lacquered box toward the lady's chamber. It was lighter than it looked, but her arms ached nonetheless, not from weight, but from what it represented. Inside were the adornments of status, symbols of lineage and vanity carved into metal, glass, and silk. Today, the Lady Eleanor would be prepared not just for a meal or a prayer, but for an audience in the upper hall, a gathering of visiting knights, widowed countesses, and gossamer alliances spun from ambition. And for that, her hair must be perfect. Lynette pushed the chamber doors open with her shoulder. Eleanor stood already dressed in a sapphire gown, its sleeves draping like rivers, the neckline scalloped with silver thread. Her golden hair fell in a cascade down her back, unbound like a banner not yet hoisted. The lady sat on a stool beside the window. "Did you bring the circlet?" she asked without turning. "Yes, my lady." Lynette knelt behind her, placing the box gently on a low table. The lid creaked open. Inside, carefully nested among folded velvet, lay the tools of her morning labor. Silver hairpins carved like feathers, a slender comb of whalebone, silk threads dyed deep red and green, and the circlet, a delicate crown of interwoven filigree, adorned with tiny emeralds like dew caught in ivy. Lynette began with the comb, pulling it slowly through the lady's hair. The strands gleamed in the light, thick and fragrant from oils she had applied only an hour before. With each stroke, she parted sections with her fingers and began to braid. The pattern was intricate, a twist at the crown, a weaving spiral, then 2 loops pinned behind each ear, each anchored by a silver feather. They spoke little. Only the crackle of the hearth and the faint sound of boots outside punctuated the silence. Then softly, Eleanor said, "My mother wore this circlet on her betrothal day." Lynette paused. She must have looked beautiful. She did. She was terrifying. Lynette smiled faintly, though the lady could not see. "I was 7 when I saw her crowned. There was blood in the courtyard that day. My uncle had fallen from his horse trying to impress her. I thought it meant something, that men would bleed for women like her." She tilted her head. "Would anyone bleed for you, Lynette?" The question settled heavy in the air. "No one has ever been asked to," Lynette answered. That's not quite the same, is it?" The braiding continued. Lynette tied off the final knot with crimson silk. Then came the circlet. She lifted it gently. It was lighter than expected, cold as winter metal. She held it just above the lady's head, then slowly, reverently, lowered it onto the woven crown of braids. It settled with a click. Eleanor reached for the mirror. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "I do not look like my mother, but perhaps I frighten in my own way." "You look like yourself," Lynette said quietly. A pause, then. "That's the kindest thing anyone has said to me this month." It was strange, this intimacy. Strange and dangerous. Handmaids were not meant to offer comfort, only service. But in that moment, with the sun glancing off the emeralds and the room filled with the scent of lavender, they were not lady and servant. They were simply two girls, both alone in different ways. Eleanor turned. "Will you braid my hair again tonight, for the vigil?" "If you wish it." "I do." Lynette lowered her gaze, but she smiled, a small thing, felt rather than seen. As she gathered the comb and silk back into the box, she thought about her own hair, left unbraided, tucked beneath her cap, never seen by anyone but herself in the candlelight. No one would pin silver feathers into it. No one would whisper to her in reflection. But she didn't mind. This was enough, to be the hands that made another shine. The bells rang again, the 4th hour, which meant the gathering in the lesser hall was already underway. Lynette, now rid of her tasks in the ladies' chamber, had slipped into the shadows of the upper corridor, just beyond the tall arch that led into the great stone gallery. From here she could hear the clinking of knives and cups, the low murmur of baritone voices, and the occasional bright peal of feminine laughter echoing like birdsong across the cold ceiling. She had not been invited. No handmaid was. But she had permission to watch quietly, invisibly. And so she did. The feast was not lavish, not by high court standards, but still more than enough to make her stomach knot. Platters of roast quail with rosemary, trencher loaves filled with stewed mushrooms and gravy, wheels of soft goat cheese bleeding onto carved platters, pomegranates sliced open like jewels, honeyed almonds in glazed bowls. Even from a distance, the smells turned her head light. And there she was, Lady Eleanor, seated between a visiting baron from the southern coast and a freckled widow with too many rings and not enough children. Eleanor laughed politely, never too loudly, her hands folded just so over the linen of her lap. Her circlet glimmered beneath the colored glass of the window, casting a green reflection onto her cheek. She was doing what noble daughters were trained to do, smile just enough, sip slowly, speak sparingly, tilt her head only when necessary. Lynette had helped craft that version of her, with braids and cloth and coal and lavender. And now she watched it move through the room like a candle dancing on uncertain air. Behind her, in a cramped alcove, the other handmaids were gathered, whispering, eyes darting, one or two sneaking crumbs of black bread from their apron pockets. "You should see the prince," murmured one. hair like sun-kissed hay and eyes like a rainstorm. You speak of storms like they're good things. Another replied, rain floods our quarters and soaks our straw. They laughed softly. Linnet didn't join them. She kept her gaze on the table. She knew the prince, had glimpsed him yesterday, tall, broad-shouldered, hair too carefully tousled to be natural. His words to Eleanor had been smooth, meaningless. But his eyes had lingered too long when the lady drank from her goblet. Linnet had seen it. He watches her as if she were venison, she had whispered to herself. And perhaps in this world, that was all any woman could be, something dressed, scented, and prepared to be tasted. The laughter from the table surged. A servant tripped, spilling a trencher of gravy near the widow's feet. A guard moved to help, but the prince was quicker. He knelt, pressed a napkin to her shoe, and smiled up at her like a knight from a tale. The room rippled with delight. Eleanor's smile did not reach her eyes. Linnet recognized that too. She turned away. Back in the lower kitchens, the smells were stronger, heavier. She descended the steps into a world of smoke and sweat and dogs slinking beneath benches. Here, the feast was born from hands blistered by the heat of ovens, from knives dulled on bone and stone, from women whose backs ached in silence. She helped wash the wooden bowls, scraped the ash from burnt loaves, cleaned the wine stains from the lower flagstones. She was no longer Linnet of the ladies' chamber. She was just another pair of hands. And yet, when the stew was ladled out for the servants, thin, mostly broth, with a carrot or two and scraps of fat, she took her portion and stepped into the far corner to eat alone. She didn't mind the quiet or the bitter taste. She thought of Eleanor's circlet, of roast quail and pomegranate, of the way the prince's eyes had lingered, and she whispered softly, "Let her never be consumed." She wasn't sure to whom she spoke, the gods, the saints, or herself. Only that she meant it. The vigil began just after twilight. The great chapel's bells tolled 8 solemn times, their heavy song carrying through the icy wind and settling like dust across the castle's old bones. Servants and lords alike filed into the hall in silence, an annual tradition marking the day Lady Eleanor's mother had died. It had been 5 winters since the Duchess's passing, and yet every year Eleanor knelt for hours beside the candlelit altar, swathed in mourning black, with a sprig of withered lavender clasped between her fingers. The vigil was not for show, it was something else. Something private and heavy that no silk veil could soften. Linnet had been given one task that evening, to present the gift. It was custom for every noble daughter to receive a token on the eve of the vigil, a symbol of continuity, of beauty surviving grief. In the days of the old Duchess, it might have been a sapphire ring or a carved relic from some distant relic trader. But this year the Duke had chosen something simpler, or perhaps more cruel, a necklace. Silver, delicate, threaded with tiny moonstone beads and a single teardrop opal in the center. It had once belonged to the Duchess herself. Lynette held it in her palms like it might break. The box was lined with midnight velvet. She had polished the silver links until her fingers ached. Even now, in the dim corridor leading to the chapel, she could see her own reflection warped across the gem's glossy surface. She did not know why it unsettled her. Maybe because it felt like a chain. The guard at the chapel door nodded. She slipped inside. It was dark, almost entirely so, save for rows upon rows of wax candles lining the nave. Their flames flickered as though breathing. The stained glass, now invisible in the night, cast no color, only the faint shadows of saints and martyrs across the floor. Eleanor knelt alone in the front, cloaked in black. Her hair had been braided again as she requested, that same winding crown of loops Lynette had practiced into perfection. The circlet had been left behind. No jewels for mourning. Lynette approached on quiet feet. Her boots made no sound against the stone. When she reached the altar rail, she knelt as well, offering the box with both hands. Her eyes stayed downcast. "My lady," she whispered. Eleanor said nothing. The silence between them stretched so long that Lynette feared the lady might not take it. But then, finally, a hand reached out, trembling, bare, and opened the box. Lynette glanced up. Eleanor stared at the necklace with an expression Lynette couldn't read. It was not joy, nor sorrow. It was a stillness deeper than either. "She wore this the last time she held me," Eleanor said. Her voice was soft, distant, as though speaking to the chapel walls. "I was 12. She smelled of ink and old roses. She pressed her hand against my cheek and said I was too serious for my age." A pause. And then she was gone. Lynette remained kneeling. "She would have wanted you to have it," Lynette murmured. "No," Eleanor said. "She would have hated it." Lynette blinked. "My lady." "She wanted me to break things," Eleanor said, her voice tighter now. "Tradition, expectations, the court." A bitter smile curled her lips. She said, "Make them regret not listening to you." Her fingers closed the box. She did not lift the necklace out. "I don't want to wear her silence tonight," Eleanor said. Lynette didn't answer. She simply bowed again, took the box, and stood. As she turned to leave, Eleanor's voice followed her. "Thank you for not asking anything more." Lynette stopped. She almost said something, a word of comfort perhaps, or agreement, but no syllable would have done justice to the quiet between them. So she bowed again, deeper this time, and left the chapel, carrying the gift The dawn after the vigil broke cold and colorless. Mist clung to the edges of the stone battlements like the breath of ghosts. The chapel bell did not ring. The castle seemed to hold its breath, reluctant to move too quickly after a night soaked in remembrance. Lynette stood on the high balcony outside Lady Eleanor's private chamber, her hands folded in front of her apron. her eyes cast toward the distant hills where the morning fog rolled and sighed like tired silk. The air was damp. Somewhere below, the kitchen fires had just been stoked, sending faint columns of smoke skyward. She had not expected the lady to wake so early, but the door creaked behind her, and the quiet footfall that followed could belong to no one else. Eleanor joined her without a word. She wore no gown, only a woolen robe cinched hastily at the waist. Her hair was unbraided, falling in a loose curtain over her shoulders, and her face, though pale from the sleepless night, carried a clarity that Lynette had never seen before, as though something behind her eyes had broken open. "You're up early," Lynette said softly. "So are you." Lynette gave a small smile. "The servants never sleep past the sun." "No one sleeps well after memories," Eleanor replied. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was companionable, like two old friends who had learned to speak through shared stillness. Below them, the courtyard was beginning to stir. A boy chased a goose near the well. A stable hand led a foaming horse back toward the stables. A maid carried sheets across a line of wet flagstones. But up here, the world was quieter, slower. Eleanor leaned her elbows against the stone balustrade. "I used to come here with my mother," she said after a moment. "On mornings just like this, we would count birds." Lynette turned to her. "Birds," she said. "If I could spot 7 before the mist vanished, it meant my day would be lucky." "Did you ever make it to 7? "Once, the day she died." Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then, almost too quietly to hear, Lynette said, "She must have loved you greatly." Eleanor nodded, but her gaze was far away. "She loved me like a daughter born to rebel. And I loved her like a myth I could never live up to." Lynette looked down at her hands. "I think she'd be proud of the woman you are now." "No," Eleanor said, "she would pity her." That hung between them, raw, unhidden. Then Eleanor shifted. "Do you ever think of leaving?" Lynette blinked. "Leaving the castle?" "Leaving it all. The work, the rituals, the silence." Lynette studied the fog beyond the hills. "Where would I go? Does it matter?" Lynette hesitated. "It would, if I had someone waiting." "That's the trouble with being seen only when needed," Eleanor murmured. "You begin to believe you vanish when no one is looking." Lynette swallowed. "You see me." Eleanor turned to face her fully. "Yes, I do." It was the first time the lady had said that, not as a noble speaking to a servant, but as one woman to another. It was more intimate than any braid, any dressing ritual. It was a thread woven between them, one that could not be seen by the others, but could be felt, taut and trembling in the morning mist. They stood that way for a while longer, saying nothing more. Eventually, Eleanor pushed herself away from the balustrade. "I'm to meet the prince at midday," she said with the air of someone recalling a chore. Lynette's stomach tightened. "Will you wear the necklace?" No, Eleanor said with a small smile, but I will wear the braids. Then she stepped back into her chamber, and Linnet remained alone on the balcony, watching a lone bird cut through the fog, silent and swift. Number 1. She began to count. The midday sun slipped reluctantly through layers of gray cloud, washing the castle halls in a dull silver sheen. Even the stained glass in the northern corridor, usually rich with color, seemed muted, as if the very light had lost its voice. Linnet followed 3 steps behind Lady Eleanor. The lady walked with practiced poise, her gown trailing like a ribbon of ocean through the cold stone hall. Her hair, once wild that morning, was now woven again into the circlet braid, a crown of defiance wrapped in submission. Linnet had done it herself, this time with strands of pale blue silk laced into the coils, barely visible but present like breath held behind the lips. They arrived at the prince's chamber. 2 guards stood at attention. One knocked. The door creaked open, and Linnet was dismissed with a nod. But she did not return to the servants' quarters. Instead, she lingered in the alcove of an arched window just down the hall, her presence cloaked by shadow and custom. Servants were invisible unless called upon, and sometimes even silence bore witness. The chamber beyond the door was dim, its shutters open only a crack. Voices murmured. The prince's tone was soft, yet thick with performance, like a song rehearsed too many times. "You look tired, Lady Eleanor." "It was a long vigil," came the lady's reply. "And did the ghosts grant you peace?" "I do not beg ghosts for mercy." Linnet flinched at the steel in her voice. "I admire that," the prince said, drawing the syllables out like honey. "You possess a restraint rare in women of court." Linnet heard footsteps, leather boots over stone, a chair scraping. Then, after a pause, "Is that the necklace I sent?" "No," Eleanor said, "it is not." "Ah," the prince replied, "then you are not easily adorned." "I choose what I wear." More silence. Then the scrape of something softer, cloth, perhaps a hand reaching across fabric, a gesture too familiar. Linnet pressed her back against the wall. "You're not like the others," the prince said. "You carry silence like a sword." "And you," Eleanor said, "carry charm like a veil, thin and easily lifted." There was no laughter after that, only the sound of pacing. Then a click, perhaps a goblet set down. A note of tension in the air, thin and brittle as spun glass. "I intend to court you properly," he said after a long pause. "I do not require intentions," she replied. "I require honesty." "You wound me." "Not yet." Linnet didn't wait to hear more. She turned and slipped away, each step quick and quiet down the stairs to the southern wing. She did not know what she had just witnessed, a flirtation, confrontation, a chess match without a board. But it clung to her like smoke. She retreated to the embroidery room. A dozen other girls were there, hunched over linen stretched on wooden frames, stitching the crests of houses they would never belong to. A fire burned low in the corner. Linnet took her seat in silence and began to thread a needle, but her fingers trembled. She thought of the lady seated beside the prince, of blue silk hidden in a braid, of silence used as armor, and of the words never allowed between a servant and her mistress. Would Elinor marry him? Would the blue thread still be braided when she did? Linnet's needle slipped. Blood welled on her thumb. She wiped it clean and kept sewing. The pattern must continue, even when the thread frayed. The castle always changed after sunset. The wind grew louder in the corridors, whispering through cracks in the stone like old regrets. The torches threw longer shadows. Footsteps became cautious, even when there was nothing to fear. And in the servants' quarters, whispers traveled faster than fire. The prince leaves tomorrow. He requested her company at dawn. They say he wants the Duke's approval before the next full moon. Linnet listened but did not join. She sat alone at the edge of the washing trough, hands still damp from scrubbing the lady's silk evening shawl. It smelled faintly of rosemary and hearth smoke. Threads of gold shimmered even in the dim light. She had no appetite. The stew was cold by now anyway. Instead, she climbed the winding servants' stair toward the western tower, a forbidden place at night, but one few watched. It was said the Duchess once sat here in secret, overlooking the moonlit orchard. At the top was a small stone balcony. She stepped into the wind and exhaled. Below her, the orchard was awash of gray and silver. The branches had no leaves now, only the memory of blossoms. The moon hung low behind thin clouds, casting its light like a half-forgotten prayer. Linnet untied her cap. Her hair fell to her shoulders, tangled, uneven, stubbornly plain. She had not shown it in public since she was 10. But now she let it breathe. She closed her eyes and imagined the braid she had woven that morning, the way the blue silk caught on her fingers, the way Elinor's hair sighed as it fell into place. Would the prince ever touch it like that? Would he undo it? Would he see her only as something beautiful to claim? And did Elinor want that? The questions made her chest tighten. She did not know what she wanted. Only that something in her had shifted, a feeling that had no name, but lived in the space between each brushstroke, each careful fold of fabric, each stolen glance across the mirror. Love, perhaps, or something lonelier. A door creaked behind her. She turned quickly, too quickly to hide her hair, but it was Elinor, dressed not in a gown but a simple robe, no jewelry, no slippers, just herself. "I wondered where you'd gone," she said. Linnet bowed her head, eyes on the floor. "Forgive me, my lady, I don't." The word was soft, final. Elinor stepped forward, then paused. "Your hair," she whispered, "it's beautiful." Linnet's breath caught. "I've never seen it before." "No one does." Eleanor took another step. The wind moved her robe. Moonlight touched the edge of her cheek. "Do you wish to leave?" she asked. Lynette shook her head. "I don't know." "Do you wish to stay?" "I don't know that either." A long silence. Then Eleanor said, "I feel like I'm being watched every moment I breathe, as if every glance must be calculated, every smile sharpened. But when I'm with you, I forget." Lynette looked up. "I don't know how to be more than what I am," she said. "You already are." Another pause. Then, as though time had melted between them, Eleanor lifted her hand. She reached for Lynette's hair. She did not braid it. She didn't twist it or pin it. She simply touched it, gently, reverently. And for a moment there were no titles, no servant, no lady. Just two women beneath a silent moon, standing closer than rules permitted, held together by something older than words. Lynette closed her eyes, not to pretend, but to remember. Whatever happened next, whether the prince stayed or left, whether this castle crumbled or endured, this moment would live. And that was enough. The next morning was strangely warm for winter. The frost that usually painted the windows was gone, melted into fine mist that clung to the edges of the courtyard like a breath too long held. The castle stirred early, as it always did when nobles departed or arrived. Lynette had been told the prince would ride at noon, but none of that felt real, not after the night on the balcony. She had braided the lady's hair again as requested, but her fingers trembled with every twist. The strands slid through her hands like silk soaked in meaning. Neither of them spoke of what had passed. No glances, no echoes. Only silence polished to perfection. And that was how it must be. What had happened between them belonged to the night and the wind and the moon that told no one's secrets. Still, others noticed. The maid who handed Lynette her apron that morning tilted her head. "You're quiet today." "I'm always quiet." "Not like this." Lynette said nothing. As she walked toward the linen tower, she caught glimpses, brief, darting looks from other servants, as if something about her had changed. Not her clothes, not her posture, but her presence. It wasn't confidence, it was fragility made visible. And in a place like this, that was dangerous. By midday, the castle courtyard was bustling. Horses pawed the ground. Squires shouted. Pages ran with messages. The prince stood near the stables, cloaked in fur-lined velvet, his boots polished to shine like river stone. Eleanor stood beside him. Lynette watched from a window above, hidden behind a faded tapestry. She could see Eleanor's profile, serene, elegant, unreadable. Her braids were coiled tightly, flawless, crowned in silver. The prince leaned in, spoke something, smiled. And for a moment, Eleanor turned not to him, but upward toward the window. Their eyes met. A second, no more, but it was enough. Lynette stepped back. She did not want to know what that look meant, not now. Not when the prince would be gone by sunset and this castle would resume its rhythm, as if nothing had happened, as if a hand had never touched her hair, as if a voice had never called her beautiful beneath the moon. She fled the corridor, down stone steps, past the kitchens, through the servants' chapel, and into the laundry courtyard where steam rose in thick white plumes and no one had time for watching. There, behind hanging sheets and boiling pots, she found refuge. Until the voice came. "You shouldn't have looked at her like that." Linnet turned. It was Marcy, another servant girl, one who'd seen too much, said too little, and always noticed the wrong things. "I don't know what you mean," Linnet said too quickly. Marcy stepped closer. "She's above you, you know that." "I serve her." "That's not what I saw." Linnet's hands tightened. "Say what you came to say." Marcy shrugged. "I saw you last night. On the balcony, I saw her hand in your hair." A silence thicker than any fog settled between them. "I won't say anything," Marcy said, softer now, "but others will, soon." She walked away. Linnet stood still, the steam swirling around her like a curtain. So it had begun. Whispers, and whispers in a castle grow teeth. By nightfall, she returned to the ladies' chamber to light the fire. Eleanor was not there. Only the faint scent of lavender on the pillow, and the braid still intact, untouched since morning. The rain came after midnight. It wasn't the loud kind, not a storm that shook shutters or roared through chimneys. It was the kind that crept, a steady, whispering curtain that soaked the stones and made the firewood damp. It dulled the air and silenced the night birds, and in the quiet, it made every breath feel louder than it should be. Linnet sat by the fire in the linen chamber, alone. The others had gone to sleep. Even Marcy, who had spent the last few days watching Linnet like a fox watches hens, had curled in her cot without a word. The tension had grown unbearable. No one said it aloud, but Linnet felt it in the gaps between sentences, in the way backs turned and eyes flicked away just a moment too soon. The fire was dying. She didn't bother feeding it. Her hands were full anyway. She held the lady's braid. No, not the actual braid, that would be unthinkable. But she held the ribbons. The blue silks they had woven together, the ones she had hidden in her apron since the day of the vigil. They were faintly perfumed, a little frayed at the edge. They felt warm, though they had no reason to. She shouldn't have come here. She should have gone to sleep, but instead she sat in the glow of coals, holding the last thing that felt like truth. Footsteps interrupted her silence. She stood quickly, the ribbons clenched in her fist. And then Eleanor entered. No guards. No warning, just a single candle in her hand and rain on her cloak. "You weren't at supper," she said. "I wasn't hungry." Eleanor stepped further into the room. "They've started whispering." Linnet nodded. "I know. About us." "I know that too." The candle trembled in Eleanor's hand. "I should tell them it's all untrue," she said. Linnet's heart kicked. "Yes," she said quietly, "you should." A pause, but I won't. A silence. Rain tapped against the window like someone begging to be let in. I'm not foolish, Eleanor continued. I know how this ends. Then why? Because for once, I'd like something not chosen for me. As she stepped closer, not arranged, not aligned with duty or house or name, just chosen. Her voice cracked on the last word. Lynette felt it more than she heard it. Do you choose me? She asked. Eleanor met her eyes. I did the moment you touched my hair. Then she reached out and Lynette didn't move. The candlelight danced between them. Shadows brushed the walls. The storm outside pressed against the stone like a secret trying to break in. Lynette placed the blue ribbon in Eleanor's hand. Eleanor looked at it, then smiled. It's frayed. It was never meant to last, Lynette said. And yet Eleanor stepped forward and tied it not into her own hair but into Lynette's. A single knot. No braid, no ceremony. Only a gesture, but it said everything. For a moment they stood together in the linen room, two women with no armor, no roles, just truth. Then Eleanor whispered, "They will come for you first." "I know." "And still." Lynette nodded. "And still." The road south was made of mud and memory. Lynette walked until her boots tore, and then walked barefoot. The hem of her cloak soaked in rain and thistle. Every step away from the castle felt like losing a skin, not her flesh, but the thin, invisible garment of who she had been. The handmaid, the silent shadow, the girl who wove blue into gold. She did not cry when the gates closed behind her, but she did not breathe either, not fully. The villages she passed were small, wary places. Doors that opened only half a finger's width. Faces that watched from shadows. No one offered bread. No one asked her name. A woman alone on the road with no coin and no crest was either cursed, criminal, or worse, a fallen thing. She found shelter in a crumbling chapel on the edge of a ruined orchard. It had no roof, only half a wall and an altar smothered in moss. But there was a fire pit and dry straw and silence. She curled beneath the beams and let herself sleep. She dreamt of hair falling loose beneath a braid. She dreamt of hands tying ribbon where crowns should go. She dreamt of a name whispered into her spine. Not her name. Not the one they used in the castle, but the one she had forgotten. When she woke, her hands were gripping the blue ribbon so tightly it had creased into itself. She thought of burying it. She thought of burning it. But instead, she tied it into her hair for no one, only herself. Days became weeks. She traded washing for bread, mending for cheese. She walked when she could and hid when she must. She learned the name of every star that hung above her borrowed nights, and forgot the exact shape of Eleanor's voice, not the words, but the rhythm of it. But there were moments. Once in a market, she saw a braid tied with blue silk. Just a child imitating something she didn't understand. Once in a chapel, She lit a candle beside another noblewoman, and the wax bled in the same pattern as her memories. Once, in a dream, Eleanor spoke to her with no sound, and the air between them filled with lavender. She woke with her hand pressed over her heart, and in her fist, again, the ribbon, as if it had never left. Then one morning she came to a village where the church bells rang too softly for a town so poor, and she saw why. The tower had cracked. The stone was split from lightning, and the priest was too old to climb. Linnet, with no name and no place, offered her hands. No one asked where she had learned to tie a knot so tight it could hold a bell's song. No one asked where she had learned to kneel for hours in silence, head bowed, unmoving. But the old priest watched, and one evening, as she scrubbed the floor with oil and ash, he said, "You are not from here." She didn't deny it. "You carry something." "I carry nothing," she said. "No," he whispered. "You carry the shape of love never spoken." And with that he left her alone again. But she wept that night not from shame or loss, but because he had named it, at last. The next morning she climbed the bell tower, not for prayer, not for duty, but to look north. And in the far mist, thin, pale, like the hem of a forgotten cloak, she saw it. The castle, still standing, still waiting. And she whispered into the wind, "I remember." And the wind, soft as a breath in her hair, replied, "So does she." It was nearly spring. The trees had not yet blossomed, but the wind had changed. It carried warmth now hesitant, like a lover returning after war. The village chapel still leaned to one side, but moss had begun to bloom in vivid green streaks along its stones. Linnet had stayed longer than she thought she would. A season, then another. She had braided her own hair again, not tightly, not as she once did for Eleanor, just enough to hold the ribbon in place. A token, a tether. She spent her days mending clothes, scrubbing pews, tying bell ropes. Her silence became a comfort to the villagers, who spoke of her as the girl from nowhere, who prayed without words and healed things with her hands, torn cloth, burnt soup, broken hearts. But nothing had prepared her for the boy. He arrived one afternoon on a pony too large for his legs, bearing a scroll tucked in waxed linen and tied with a faded green cord. "For the woman with a blue ribbon," he said simply. Her hands trembled as she untied it. No seal, no signature, only 10 words. "I named a garden after you. It never stops growing." She read them once, twice, then sat down in the dust, heart clenched tight. It was not a plea, not a confession, just a truth planted across distance like seed in soil. Eleanor had sent it, somehow, some way, despite the eyes, despite the rules, despite the veil of time and station and silence. Linnet wept, but not with sorrow. She looked up. The old priest was standing at the chapel door watching her. He didn't speak. He only nodded and left her to decide. That night she returned to the bell tower, not to pray, to braid, each loop tighter than the last. She found the richest ribbon she owned pale blue still, but now mended where it had once frayed. She wrapped it into the coil behind her ear, pinned it with a thorn she had plucked from the chapel hedge. A sign, a boundary, a vow. By dawn she had packed. Not much, a cloak, a pouch of herbs, the old comb, and the letter. She didn't tell the priest goodbye. He would understand. The villagers watched her leave without question. A few made the sign of the cross. One girl left a single daisy on the stone step where Linnet used to sit. The road north was longer than before, but she had a direction, not to the castle, but to the garden, whatever that meant. A week later, she reached a hamlet she didn't recognize, and there, behind a wooden gate woven with ivy, she found it. It wasn't grand. It wasn't royal, just rows of lavender, vines of climbing rose, a bench beneath a tree, a ribbon tied to each branch, blue, green, silver, some already faded to white. A woman stood with her back turned, hair unbraided, cloak simple. Linnet didn't speak. She just stepped forward, and when Eleanor turned, there were no words, only a smile, and the knowledge that nothing forbidden had ever felt so right. The garden had no walls. That was the first thing Linnet noticed. No hedge to keep out wind or wolves. No iron gate to separate the sacred from the profane. It was open, wildly, stubbornly open, as if the very soil refused the notion of enclosure. She sat beside Eleanor beneath the almond tree. They hadn't spoken in hours, not since that first moment, the one when eyes met and silence bowed its head. Now they sat close, with only breath and light between them, watching petals fall like snowfall in spring. The bench was old, weather-worn. A small crack split its backrest like a line of history, but it held them both, and that was enough. Linnet traced the grain of the wood with one finger. "You never sent a second letter," she said softly. Eleanor didn't look away from the blossoms. "I didn't know if you'd read the first. I read it 100 times. Eleanor smiled, not sadly, just deeply. "I tried to forget you," she said after a while. "I was promised to a man from Barmouth. He had fields and banners and hands like stone. I wore the braid you made me the morning he arrived." "Oh, did he see it?" "Yes, he asked if it was for him." "And what did you say?" "I told him no, and he never came back." Silence again. This time full of laughter neither of them let escape. They were older now, not by years but by hours, by partings, by every word unsaid and every glance endured. Linnet bore it in the curve of her shoulders. Eleanor bore it in the way she no longer looked over her own. "You're not a lady anymore," Linnet said. "No," Eleanor replied, "and you're no longer invisible." Linnet turned, and for the first time reached out not to braid or serve or bow, but simply to touch. She cupped Eleanor's face. The skin was warm, familiar, unspeakably precious. Eleanor leaned into it. "I found this place 3 winters ago," she whispered. "A healer gave it to me when I left the court, said I needed somewhere to let things grow. You named it after me." "I did." Lynette smiled. "Why?" "Because you were the only thing I ever wanted to grow beside." The wind rustled the ribbons in the tree, all tied in pairs. Blue to green, white to silver, some new, some threadbare, each a promise, each a memory. Lynette stood and walked to the tree. From her cloak she pulled the ribbon, frayed, faded, but unbroken. She tied it to a low branch. Eleanor joined her, threading a second, a new one, pale green. They knotted them together and let the breeze carry their shape. Later, in the garden's fading light, they built a fire. No guards, no bells, no rank. Just 2 women and the quiet persistence of what could not be erased. They shared bread and stories and eventually laughter. And when the stars returned and the smoke rose into a sky finally wide enough to hold them, Lynette spoke the words she had carried in silence for far too long. "I loved you, even when I didn't know what the word meant." Eleanor took her hand. "I loved you because I didn't know." And the garden listened and did not judge, because some stories aren't meant to be written in ledgers or laws. They are meant to be tied in ribbon and left to bloom.